Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we convert complex research into actionable knowledge, tailor-made for you. Today, we are undertaking a full, comprehensive deep dive into Generation Z.
That's right, a generation that gets talked about constantly, lots of headlines, lots of opinions.
Exactly. Commentators worldwide seem both, impressed and deeply worried about them. So just to be clear on who we mean, we're examining the cohort generally defined as those born between, 1997 and 2012?
Roughly, yes.
Okay.
They follow the millennials, obviously, and come before the newest group, Gen Alpha.
And everyone knows them by that informal nickname, right? Zoomers. We'll probably stick with that.
Sure, it's catchy. But our mission today is really to strip away those easy labels.
Yeah.
Get beyond the stereotypes.
Like digital natives. Or the flip side, lazy teens.
Precisely. We aren't here for the shallow takes. We want to look at the deep paradoxes that the actual hard data reveals, specifically this really striking contradiction. How can a generation be objectively better behaved than pretty much any cohort before it, while also being profoundly, maybe even debilitatingly stressed and depressed? That's the puzzle.
And the backdrop to all of this, the single biggest context for that tension, has to be the digital world, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's inescapable.
Yeah.
They are the first social generation, truly, to grow up with Web 2.0 and mobile tech, not as something new or exciting.
Right. Not like for millennials, maybe.
Exactly. For Zoomers, it was just there, an established, expected commodity, almost from infancy.
So understanding what that constant presence, that immersion, actually did to their habits, their development, their psychological well-being, that feels like the key to this whole deep dive.
It really is. It sets up these fascinating, often opposing forces, and you see them influencing basically everything from their political views to, what they buy.
Okay, let's unpack that digital piece first. When Zoomers first started hitting their teens, everyone called them digital natives.
Oh yeah, that term was everywhere.
And the assumption was, because they grew up in the internet age, they must have this inherent sophisticated mastery of technology. It just made sense, right?
It seemed logical on the surface. But the data, it reveals a pretty shocking gap between just having access to devices and possessing genuine digital skill or literacy.
So that label, digital native, we should be wary of it.
Extremely skeptical, I'd say. It sort of implies that just consuming technology automatically makes you literate in using it effectively, which isn't true. There was this huge study in 2018, the International Computer and Information Literacy Study, ICILS. It was a massive wake-up call.
Okay, what did it find?
Get this. It found that only a tiny fraction, just 2% of 8th graders, were actually proficient enough with information devices to really justify that digital native label. Only 2%.
Wow. 2%, that's incredibly low.
It is. And maybe slightly less shocking, but still significant. Only 19% could work truly independently, gather, manage, and critically evaluate information using a computer.
That's a huge distinction, isn't it? They might be fluent in scrolling, tapping, consuming.
It's exactly consumption fluency.
But not necessarily in creating, managing, or critically analyzing information.
Precisely. And that leads directly to this phenomenon researchers are now starting to talk about. Tech shame in the workplace.
Tech shame? How does that work? You'd think the youngest employees would be the most tech savvy.
You would think. But we're hearing reports and seeing some data suggesting that some Gen Z employees genuinely struggle with basic, let's say, institutional ICP skills. Things like efficient touch typing, navigating complex file structures, sometimes even operating standard office equipment like scanners.
So wait, a generation that, anecdotally at least, seems to have a smartphone practically welded to their hand struggles with a scanner. How does that compute?
Well, think about the primary interface they mastered. It's usually a small vertical screen, optimized for quick scrolling, tapping, visual consumption. That doesn't necessarily build the skills needed for, say, a horizontal desktop environment with a keyboard, mouse, complex software, file organization. It's a literacy gap born from kind of hyper-specialization in one type of interface.
So their high level of engagement didn't translate into broad competence. It resulted in a specific kind of behavioral dependency.
A dependency that is, frankly, intense. And we see that reflected in how they spend their time. OECD data shows this really stark shift.
Oh yeah, what kind of shift?
The amount of time Gen Z spent on electronic devices per weekday shot up significantly between 2012 and 2019. It went from under 2 hours to nearly 3 hours.
Nearly 3 hours a day just on devices. Wow. Okay, so where did that extra hour plus come from? What did it replace?
Well, the data strongly suggests it came directly at the expense of reading, specifically reading physical books. Time spent reading just plummeted as screen time went up.
And that obviously has consequences. I mean, we have to assume.
Oh, absolutely. And they're pretty clear in the research. We see a robust negative correlation between excessive time spent watching TV or, just passively surfing the internet for leisure.
Right.
And key metrics like academic performance, the ability to maintain sustained attention, and critically, vocabulary usage.
Vocabulary. Really?
Yes. There's a noticeable decline being observed in the complexity and range of vocabulary used by school children. Some educators even report students becoming actively resistant to using analog tools, like a physical dictionary. Why bother when you can just type it into a search bar, right?
The path of least resistance.
Which brings us back to consumption. This high level of consumption, especially on social platforms, really defines them. It even seems to shape their behavior in ways that sometimes directly contradict their own stated ethics or values.
How so? You mean like in their purchasing habits?
That's a prime example. It raises this important question. Why do their expressed values sometimes seem to, collapse when faced with social pressure or the allure of trends?
Right. That's the core contradiction you see in the economic sphere, isn't it? Pollsters will tell you this generation signals strong support for high ideals. Environmental consciousness, sustainability, ethical sourcing, they sound like skeptical consumers, in theory.
They do. They're very aware of the issues, verbally at least.
And yet, their actual purchasing behavior shows absolutely sky-high demand for cheap, fast fashion, which, let's be honest, is a model that's pretty much the opposite of environmentally conscious or durable. So why the huge disconnect?
Well, I think it comes down to social currency versus abstract ethics, especially in the always-on attention economy they inhabit.
Social currency, meaning fitting in, looking good online.
Exactly. Their purchases are heavily influenced by social media influencers, and perhaps even more potently by FOMO, that pervasive fear of missing out.
FOMO, the great driver.
It really is. The immediate, visible reward of being trendy, of having the right aesthetic for an Instagram post or a TikTok video that seems to outweigh the long-term, often invisible value of sustainability or ethical production.
So it proves that their stated values, which might be genuinely sincere.
I think they often are sincere.
They just lack the durability, maybe. They can't withstand the relentless pressure of constant social comparison and that powerful desire for instant gratification that platforms breed.
That seems to be what the behavioral data suggests. The immediate social reward wins out.
It's a really important insight that digital pressure actively shapes their ethics and choices. Okay, but now let's shift gears pretty dramatically. Let's look at that better behaved angle you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Because this is where it gets, for me anyway, really interesting. In almost every traditional metric of teenage risk-taking, Gen Z seems to be defying historical trends. They're not behaving like teenagers used to.
It's quite remarkable, actually. The data shows they are, factually, better behaved and less hedonistic than previous cohorts like millennials or Gen X at the same age.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, teenage pregnancies are way down, hitting historic lows across the developed world, US, UK, Europe. Big drops. Alcohol consumption is significantly lower. There's data showing that in the UK, for instance, Gen Z binged on alcohol something like 20% less often than millennials did when they were the same age.
20% less. That's substantial.
It is. And youth crime rates also plummeting. We saw steep drops in places like the UK and Canada throughout the 2010s. Less underage drinking, less delinquency, fewer arrests.
And it's not just avoiding bad behaviors, is it? There's also evidence about their psychological makeup, self-control.
Yes, exactly. It's fascinating. Researchers replicated the famous marshmallow test, the classic psychological study about delaying gratification.
Sure, wait for one marshmallow now or two later.
That's the one. They found that Gen Z teens are actually better at delaying gratification than teens who were tested back in the 1960s.
Better. That seems counterintuitive with the instant gratification culture of the internet.
It does, doesn't it? But it suggests they have, on average, more self-control in that specific context. They seem to be postponing many of those traditionally youthful, risky, often impulse-driven behaviors.
Why, though? Is it just that they're more mature or something else going on?
Well, that postponement seems key. The interpretation emerging isn't necessarily that they're delaying gratification out of, say, contentment or exceptional patience. It might be that they're delaying out of intense pressure.
Pressure? Pressure for what?
Pressure to optimize their lives, to succeed. It's less about hedonism, enjoying the moment, and more about a kind of survivalism. They seem constantly aware of needing to prepare for what they perceive as a very precarious future.
So that self-control isn't necessarily good, it's driven by anxiety.
That's the hypothesis, and it leads us straight into the huge mental health trade-off. This apparent self-control seems to be purchased at the incredibly high cost of constant stress and anxiety.
Which fits with the other label they get, not just better behaved, but also
Stressed, depressed, and exam-obsessed. That description really captures the other side of the coin.
And the numbers here are just, well, they're frankly devastating, aren't they?
They really are alarming. A recent survey, I think it was projected for 2025, found nearly 46% of American Gen Z members reported having been diagnosed with a mental health condition.
46%. Almost 1 in 2. That's staggering.
It's a huge number, and we're seeing these severe, steady increases in reported anxiety, depression, and especially loneliness. These trends were already rising sharply throughout the 2010s, mind you. This isn't just a pandemic effect, though that certainly didn't help.
No, this predates COVID.
Absolutely. And look at the truly tragic statistics around self-harm. In England, for example, hospitalizations specifically for self-harm doubled among teenage girls between 1997 and 2018.
Doubled. That's horrifying. It speaks to a profound erosion of emotional resilience or coping skills, doesn't it?
It really does. And tied into all this is sleep deprivation. It's endemic in this generation. Constantly connected devices interrupt sleep patterns.
Right. You mentioned kids literally sleeping with their phones.
Many do. And we know that chronic lack of sleep is directly linked to low mood, impaired emotional regulation, difficulty concentrating, damaged cognitive function. It's a vicious cycle.
It really forces you to ask that question again. What did this constant connectivity, this relentless exposure to the curated perfection and social comparison of social media actually cost them psychologically?
A very high price, it seems. And while they might be avoiding alcohol or serious crime more than previous generations, we have to note this phenomenon of substance use substitution.
Meaning they're finding other ways to cope or self-medicate.
Exactly. They aren't necessarily avoiding psychoactive experiences altogether. They seem to be changing their coping mechanisms, shifting their substance of choice.
So while drinking is down,
drug use appears to be up in certain categories. Data from the UK, for example, showed that drug consumption, usually cannabis among 16 to 24-year-olds, rose by about half in just 7 years leading up to the pandemic.
By half.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And similarly, in the U.S., college-aged youth are now reportedly more likely than older generations to use marijuana. So it's less about avoiding substances entirely and perhaps more about shifting which substances they use, likely reflecting that pervasive need to manage or numb this underlying internal anxiety.
That need for emotional stability or maybe just escape seems like a huge driver for their cultural engagement too, doesn't it? Let's pivot now to their culture. One thing commentators always mention is this pervasive, defining trait among Gen Z, intense nostalgia.
Oh, definitely. A deep, often romanticized longing for eras they never actually lived through themselves.
Why do you think that is? Is it just escapism?
That seems to be a large part of it, yes. It's a form of emotional escapism. You see, traditional youth subcultures, the kind that happen face-to-face, in the real world they seem noticeably quieter, less distinct maybe for this generation. But online, they flourish in these carefully curated, often aestheticized digital spaces. Think about phenomena like cottagecore.
Right, the sort of idealized, rural, simple life thing.
Exactly. It surged during the COVID lockdowns especially. It really functions as a kind of utopian escapism, an aspirational nostalgia for a simplicity and tranquility that, let's be honest, probably never truly existed in that way.
And it's not just imagined pasts. They're nostalgic for specific recent decades too, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's the persistent consumption of 1980s culture, massively fueled by shows like Stranger Things, of course, but also really strong aesthetic nostalgia for the 1990s and the early 2000s. The whole Y2K aesthetic is huge.
It's interesting, though, that the very digital world they're so immersed in, the one driving some of this escapism, is also driving a kind of countercultural movement that promotes a very traditional analog behavior.
You mean book talk?
Exactly, book talk. This massive community, primarily on TikTok, seems dominated by young women, and it's apparently caused this huge surge in volitional reading, like reading for pleasure.
It really has. It's a fascinating example of the platform being used in an unexpected way. It's genuinely stimulated reading and driven physical book sales quite dramatically. So the internet isn't all bad news for old media, perhaps.
A silver lining, maybe. But that search for stability, that yearning we see in their cultural nostalgia, that seems to be driving their recent political shifts as well.
I think that's exactly right. Initially, this generation was really defined, in the media at least, by quite passionate left-wing activism. You think of the global climate strikes led by Greta Thunberg that felt very Gen Z.
Definitely. Very visible, very youth-led.
But more recently, particularly since the early 2020s, we've seen evidence globally, certainly in North America and Europe, of a noticeable shift, a move towards the political center and in some segments increasingly towards the right.
And what's fascinating, you suggested earlier, is the core driver of that political change. It's maybe less about traditional left-right ideology.
Much less, I'd argue. And almost entirely about a craving for security, stability, in what they perceive, probably correctly, as a highly unstable, volatile, and precarious world.
So when you ask them about their top concerns, it's practical stuff.
Entirely practical. In North America, in Europe, the top concerns consistently pull as the economy, the absolutely crushing cost of living, housing shortages and affordability, and rising crime rates. They seem to be prioritizing pragmatic solutions over perceived idealism. It's about feeling safe and having a viable future.
And this search for stability, this focus on different priorities, it's also exacerbating something else significant, isn't it? This global political gender divide.
Yes, that gap is widening, and rapidly. It's one of the most striking political trends globally right now. Young women are leaning, often quite heavily left or green. Their priorities tend to be more focused on social issues, equality, climate action.
Okay. And young men.
Conversely, young men are increasingly leaning right. In some countries, quite sharply to the right.
What's driving that specifically among young men?
Well, it appears to be heavily influenced by the online ecosystem, particularly the spread of what's often termed manosphere content and the associated online communities.
And what's the core message there that seems to be resonating?
The central idea seems to be a strong backlash against feminism. There's a perception, amplified online, that women's emancipation has somehow gone too far or has come at the expense of men.
Right.
This often translates into a belief among significant numbers of young men that it's unfairly harder to be a man today, that they're suffering a loss of status or facing discrimination themselves. And social media acts as this incredibly powerful amplifier for these messages of resentment, insecurity, and grievance.
Leading to this really stark political polarization, just splitting along gender lines globally.
It's becoming very pronounced. And we have to layer one more piece of instability onto this picture: the global economic divergence they're facing. Their prospects look very different depending on where they live.
How so?
Well, in the U.S., Gen Z is actually projected, believe it or not, to be potentially richer than previous generations were at the same age.
Really? Why is that?
Primarily due to somewhat better wage growth in recent years compared to, say, millennials at that age, and also potentially greater wealth transfer from boomer parents or grandparents.
Okay, so the picture in the U.S. might be relatively better economically.
Relatively, yes. Meanwhile, young Europeans, including those in the UK, are facing a much tougher reality. Significant economic stagnation, more precarious job prospects, sky-high housing costs. It's a much bleaker outlook for many.
Which must add to that feeling of insecurity.
Absolutely. And it's driving things like a brain drain. Highly skilled young workers leaving countries with weaker economies to seek better opportunities and stability elsewhere, maybe in the U.S., or stronger European economies like Germany or the Netherlands. It just feeds that cycle of instability back home. #tag outro. So if we try to synthesize everything we've discussed, Generation Z really lives in this state of complex paradox, doesn't it? And it all seems defined somehow by their technological environment.
Yeah, it really does seem to be the connecting thread.
They're completely immersed in digital consumption, yet, as we saw, often lack fundamental digital literacy skills. They're exhibiting these really unprecedented safety and behavioral improvements in some areas. Less drinking, less crime, maybe better impulse control in certain tests.
Right, the better behaved part.
But that seems inextricably tied to this really quite crippling mental health crisis, marked by staggering levels of anxiety, depression, pervasive loneliness.
A huge trade-off.
A massive trade-off. And their cultural longings, their political priorities. They all seem to reflect this generation desperately searching for practical stability, for security, in the midst of what feels like global economic and social chaos. It's a generation shaped by volatility.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, trying to understand this incredibly complex cohort? It feels like the very definition of being well-informed has radically shifted for them, and maybe because of them.
How do you mean?
Well, it's maybe less about accumulating traditional, say, textbook knowledge, and much more about the constant draining task of navigating, filtering, verifying this relentless, often overwhelming, often polarizing stream of digital information.
While somehow trying to maintain your own psychological integrity in the face of it all. That's a huge cognitive and emotional load.
Exactly. It's a fundamentally different way of engaging with the world.
And our deep dive today really highlights how their intense defining use of social media seems to contribute significantly to some of their biggest challenges. The loneliness, the anxiety, even that widening political gender gap we discussed.
Yeah, the platforms are both central to their lives and implicated in their struggles.
Which leads us to a final, perhaps provocative thought for you to explore on your own after this. Given that these social platforms are the defining feature of their lives, both enabling connection and community, but also seemingly endangering their mental health and social cohesion, what fundamental responsibility does this most digital generation ultimately bear for perhaps demanding regulation of, or maybe even fundamentally reshaping the very tools that currently seem to drive their deepest fears and anxieties? Is it on them to fix the system they inherited? Something to mull over?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through the sources, find the core story, and basically give you the essential insights you need.
Think of it as your shortcut to understanding some really complex events.
And today, wow, we are tackling something huge, not just a sporting contest, really, but a historical moment that perfectly mirrored the Cold War tensions.
We're diving into the World Chess Championship, 1972. You know it, everyone knows it, the match of the century.
Absolutely. It was just electric.
It really was, like theater, but played out on, just 64 squares. And the geopolitical stakes, they were sky high.
On one side, you had the challenger, Bobby Fischer, American, 29 years old, this kind of eccentric genius figure.
Right, representing, U.S. individualism, capitalism, all that. And against him, the defending champ, Spassky.
Soviet, 35, the picture of the professional, but carrying this immense weight.
The weight of the entire Soviet system, basically, and the setting for this showdown. Reykjavik, Iceland, neutral ground.
And this was happening right in the middle of détente, that sort of brief thaw in the Cold War.
A very fragile thaw. And for the Soviets, chess was serious business. A Fischer win would break a 24-year Soviet stranglehold on the World Championship title. That was unthinkable for them.
They really saw chess victories as proof, almost, of their system's superiority, didn't they?
Absolutely. Ideological confirmation. And Fischer, he was this one guy, this massive threat to that whole narrative.
What's so striking right off the bat, though, is the player matchup, the stats versus the history.
Exactly. I mean, on paper, Fischer looked, well, almost unbeatable. His ELO rating was 2785, record-breaking at the time.
And Spassky's was?
2660. So Fischer was a massive 125 points ahead, clearly world number one.
And this is the kicker the sources point out.
Yeah, despite all that, Fischer had never beaten Spassky in a serious game before this match. Ever.
What is the record?
3 losses, 2 draws.
Yeah.
All in Spassky's favor. Spassky was like his personal kryptonite, his bogeyman.
Incredible. So that's our mission for this deep dive. Unpack how this thing happened, the wild qualification run, the politics, the off-the-board drama, the tactical genius.
And how it all combined to become, genuinely, one of history's most significant sporting events. It transcended chess completely.
Okay, so where do we start? The road to Reykjavik itself was pretty dramatic.
Oh, definitely. Fischer's journey to even get the chance to challenge Spassky, pure drama. Almost didn't happen.
Right. The sources mention he'd actually skipped the 1969 U.S. Championship.
He did. And that tournament was the qualifier for the 1970 Interzonal, which you needed to play in to get to the candidates' matches.
So technically he was out.
Pretty much. It took a really controversial move by the FID president at the time, Max Yu. He basically let Fischer in after another American player, Paul Benko, gave up his spot. There was some wrangling.
A bit of rule bending to get the star player in.
You could say that. But once Fischer was in, well, his performance in the 1971 candidates matches was just obliterating.
Yeah, tell us about those scores. They're legendary.
They really are. He played Mark Taimanov, a top Soviet GM, beat him 6-0, no draws, just 6 straight wins.
6-0 against a world elite player.
Unheard of. Then he plays Bent Larsen, another top contender, from Denmark this time. Same result, 6-0, again, no draws.
That's just... dominant isn't even the word. It's terrifying.
It created this aura. He had this incredible 20-game winning streak overall against Grandmaster competition. It only ended when he finally lost a game, Game 2, against Tigran Petrosian in the candidates final.
But even losing that one game didn't really stop him.
Not at all. He still won that match comfortably, 6.5 to 2.5. He wasn't just winning chess games. You felt like he was making some kind of statement with every move. A political one, almost.
And that brings us right back to the Cold War pressure cooker.
Exactly. Because those wins, especially the 6 years against Soviet players, those weren't just sports results back in Moscow. They were treated like national security issues.
So Spassky wasn't just defending a title. He was defending, like, national honor.
The whole Soviet system's reputation in chess, which they prized incredibly highly. And you contrast that with Fischer,
who had been openly critical of the Soviets for years, right?
Yeah.
That famous article.
Oh yeah, the 1962 Sports Illustrated piece, "The Russians Have Fixed World Chess." That was the headline.
What was his actual claim there?
He basically argued that Soviet players colluded. They'd agree to quick, easy draws against each other in big tournaments.
Why would they do that?
To conserve energy for playing non-Soviets, and also, crucially, to help manipulate the standings so a preferred Soviet player had the best chance to win the whole thing. Short draws meant less risk, less fatigue.
And did people believe him? Was there proof?
Well, proving collusion is always hard, but the accusation itself stuck. It perfectly fed this narrative of Fischer, the lone American genius fighting against a giant, coordinated Soviet chess machine.
Okay, so that deep mistrust, maybe even paranoia, he carried that right into Reykjavik.
Absolutely, and it led to complete chaos before they even sat down at the board. The match almost collapsed over money, mostly.
Right, the prize fund. What was the issue?
The initial fund was $125,000, which was, a record for chess. But Fischer wasn't satisfied. He demanded 30% of the gate receipts and the TV rights on top of that.
Which they hadn't agreed to.
Nope. And he just wouldn't budge. Negotiations stalled. The start date came and went. People seriously thought he was just going to walk away. It felt like the match was doomed.
This is where it gets even crazier, with interventions from way outside the chess world.
Totally. First, this British investment banker, Jim Slater, who's just a chess fan, basically doubled the prize fund out of his own pocket. Just threw in another $125,000 to try and save the match.
Wow. Just because he wanted to see it happen?
Pretty much. But even that wasn't quite enough to guarantee Fischer would show. The clincher, apparently, was a phone call.
From?
Henry Kissinger, U.S. National Security Advisor at the time. He called Fischer directly.
Kissinger called Fischer about chess.
Yep. The message was basically, Bobby, this is important for the country. You need to go and play. It's bigger than just you.
So it really was framed as a kind of proxy battle for the U.S. government, too.
No question. Fischer had to go represent.
Okay, so the money gets sorted. Kissinger makes the call. Fischer finally arrives in Iceland. But the drama doesn't stop there.
Not even close. First, he completely skips the opening ceremony on July 1st. Just doesn't show up. Big insult to the hosts and Spassky.
And then Game 1 happens, but the real fireworks were around Game 2.
Oh, yeah. Game 2, Fischer just refused to play. He showed up at the venue, but wouldn't go into the playing hall.
Why not?
The cameras. He claimed the film cameras used back then were too noisy, too distracting. He demanded they all be removed. All of them.
Were they actually noisy?
Some reports say you could hear a faint whirring if you're really close. But was it enough to disrupt a world championship match? Most people thought Fischer was exaggerating, making impossible demands.
So what did the organizers do?
They tried to compromise, remove some cameras, but Fischer held firm. All cameras out, or he wouldn't play. He didn't show up for the start of the game.
And the clock.
The chief arbiter, Lothar Schmid, had no choice. He started Fischer's clock. Fischer didn't appear within the hour allowed. Game 2 was declared a forfeit.
Unbelievable. So Spassky is now leading 2-0 without having made a single move in the second game.
Exactly. One win on the board in Game 1, one win by forfeit. It looked like Fischer was self-destructing.
People must have thought he was just having a massive tantrum, that he'd be on the next plane home.
Many did. But there's another interpretation. Anatoly Karpov, who later became world champion himself, he actually speculated that the forfeit wasn't just a tantrum.
What did he think it was?
He called it a calculated masterstroke, a piece of psychological warfare.
Thought so.
Think about it. Fischer creates chaos. He makes these outrageous demands about playing conditions. He forces Spassky into a position of uncertainty. Does Spassky stand firm on principle, or does he bend to keep the match alive? Fischer was testing the champion's nerve.
And Spassky? He blinked.
He did. And this is seen by many commentators as a huge psychological mistake. Spassky agreed to Fischer's demand to play Game 3 not in the main hall, but in a small, closed-off ping-pong room backstage. No cameras, no audience.
Why was giving it such a big deal? Spassky had the two-way lead. He had the moral high ground after the forfeit.
Because by conceding, Spassky essentially validated Fischer's complaints. He showed he was willing to break the agreed-upon conditions to accommodate his challenger's seemingly unreasonable demands. It signaled, maybe even subconsciously, that Fischer could dictate the terms. Spassky lost control of the environment and maybe some of his mental edge right there.
Okay, so Game 3. They're in this tiny back room. The match is finally truly underway, albeit under bizarre circumstances. But Game 1 had already been played, right? Before the forfeit drama.
Right. Game 1 was played on schedule after Fischer finally arrived. 9 minutes late for the start, by the way. Another bit of gamesmanship.
And how did that game go? Spassky won, we know that.
Yes, but how he won was shocking. The game reached an endgame position that was considered absolutely level, a dead draw. Experts watching assumed they'd agree to split the point any minute.
But Fischer didn't draw?
No. On move 29, he played, well, it's considered one of those famous blunders in championship history. 29, but BXH2. He just snapped off a pawn with his bishop.
Sacrificing the bishop?
For what? For 2 pawns, but in that position, it was a catastrophic miscalculation. Completely unnecessary. It threw away the draw instantly. Spassky converted the advantage, and Fischer resigned on move 56.
And Fischer blamed.
The cameras again. He claimed even the few cameras present for Game 1 distracted him and caused the blunder.
Okay, so lose Game 1 with a shocking blunder, forfeit Game 2. Score. Spassky 2, Fischer 0. Things look bleak for the challenger.
Extremely bleak. The world was watching this American hope just seemingly crumble under the pressure or his own eccentricities. But then came Game 3 in that back room.
The turning point.
Absolutely the turning point.
Yeah.
Fischer finally gets his first ever win against Spassky, and he did it in style.
What happened in the game?
Fischer played the modern Benoni, a sharp, aggressive opening, and he uncorked this really surprising move early on, 11 NH5, putting his knight on the edge of the board.
Which usually isn't considered good, right? Knights on the rim are dim.
Generally, yes. It looks strange, maybe even anti-positional. But Fischer had seen deeper. It launched a brilliant counterattack. Spassky couldn't handle the complications. The game was adjourned, but Spassky resigned the next day without resuming play after seeing Fischer's sealed move. He knew he was lost.
Wow. So the score is suddenly 2-1. Fischer's on the board.
And the psychological momentum had completely shifted. Spassky's concession on the playing conditions followed immediately by his first loss to Fischer. That had to hurt.
Then came Game 6. This one is famous for a different reason strategy and not just tactic.
Exactly. Game 6 showed Fischer wasn't just this tactical wizard. He could play deep, strategic chess and, crucially, he could surprise his opponent fundamentally.
How did he do that?
With his very first move, everyone, especially the Soviet team who had prepped for months, expected Fischer to play 1-point E4. That was his move, the start to the openings he always played, like the Sicilian defense or the Ruy Lopez.
It was his trademark.
Totally. But in Game 6, Fischer plays 1-point C4, the English opening.
Had he played that much before?
Our sources say only twice before in his entire serious career. It was a complete shock. It took the game into territory Spassky wasn't as prepared for, leading to a Queen's Gambit decline type of structure.
Like a star pitcher suddenly throwing a knuckleball nobody knew he had?
Perfect analogy. Fischer played beautifully, broke through in the center with a powerful pawn push, 20-point E4, and just dismantled Spassky's position. Spassky was playing his favorite Tartakower defense, and Fischer refuted it clinically.
And this gave Fischer the lead for the first time.
Yes, the win put Fischer ahead 3.5 to 2.5. But the truly amazing moment came after Spassky resigned.
What happened?
Spassky, the defeated champion, stood up and actually joined the audience in applauding Fischer's brilliant game.
Wow, that's incredible sportsmanship.
It really was. acknowledging the genius of his rival, even in defeat. But maybe also, a sign the pressure was getting to him.
But Spassky wasn't done yet, right? He fought back. Game 11 was a Spassky special.
It was. Fischer, perhaps feeling confident, went back to one of his signature weapons. The incredibly sharp poison pawn variation of the Najdorf Sicilian.
An opening he knew inside out.
Better than anyone in the world. It involves black, Fischer snatching a pawn on b2 with his queen, often leading to wild complications. Fischer had immense success with it.
But Spassky had a surprise ready.
Oh, did he ever. After Fischer took the pawn, Spassky played one of the most stunning moves of the entire match, 14-point MB1.
Knight back to B1, back to its starting square.
Exactly. A quiet defensive retreat that looked almost passive. But it was genius. It completely neutralized Fischer's attack and sort of trapped Fischer's own queen over on the queen side.
Fischer must have been shocked.
He clearly was. He couldn't find a good plan, made some defensive errors, and Spassky eventually won convincingly. Fischer's queen got trapped. He had to resign.
And that was the only time Fischer ever lost with the poisoned pawn Najdorf.
In his entire career, yes. An incredible demonstration by Spassky. It showed that, when focused, he could absolutely match Fischer's brilliance. The score was pulled closer again.
But the match felt like it was slipping away from Spassky overall. Was Game 13 the final blow, psychologically?
Many think so. It was another real marathon game. Fischer played Alekhine's defense, another less common choice for him. The game went on for hours and was eventually adjourned overnight.
And the Soviet team analyzed the position.
Yes, Spassky and his seconds analyzed it deeply. Their conclusion, it was a certain draw. They felt confident holding the position when play resumed.
But it wasn't a draw.
No, Fischer came back the next day and just refused to accept the draw. He kept finding ways to create problems, to complicate things. And then, in the end game, he conjured up this incredible winning plan.
What was so special about it?
It involved him maneuvering his own rook into a position where it actually got trapped by his own pawns. It looked like a blunder, sacrificing material and coordination.
Why would he do that?
Because he saw that trapping his own piece created a specific structure on the board that allowed his king to penetrate decisively. It was this incredibly counterintuitive, imaginative concept, calculation backed by sheer genius.
And Spassky couldn't hold it.
No. Fischer won. And losing a game that your entire team had analyzed as a dead draw, that must have been absolutely crushing for Spassky. Former world champion Mikhail Botvinnik called that game the highest creative achievement of Fischer.
Wow. After that, the match seemed to enter a different phase. Lots of draws.
Yeah. Following that Game 13 loss for Spassky, there was a string of 7 consecutive draws, from Game 14 right through Game 20.
Was Fischer just playing it safe now? He had the lead?
It looked that way. He built a solid lead by Game 13. He was up 8-5. Now, it seemed like he was content to just, coast towards the title. Less fireworks, more solid, safe chess, making sure Spassky couldn't claw his way back.
But the off-board stuff didn't stop.
Oh, never. Even during the draws, the tension was there. The Soviets lodged a formal complaint suggesting Fischer might be using electronic devices or chemical substances to disrupt Spassky.
Seriously? Electronic devices in 1972.
It sounds wild now, but they were suspicious. It led to the Icelandic police actually sweeping the playing hall, looking for hidden gadgets. They dismantled the chairs, checked the lighting fixtures, found nothing, of course.
Just more psychological games, adding to the bizarre atmosphere.
Exactly. Even when the chess on the board was quiet, the Cold War narrative was always humming in the background.
So how did it finally end?
Game 21. Fischer again surprised with his opening choice, playing the Taimanov variation of the Sicilian, which Spassky himself sometimes played. Fischer gradually outplayed Spassky and built up a winning advantage.
Another adjournment.
Yes, the game was adjourned in a clearly winning position for Fischer. Spassky, knowing it was hopeless, didn't even resume play the next day. He simply resigned by telephone.
Resigned by phone.
Yes. A quiet, perhaps slightly anticlimactic end to such a tumultuous match. The final score, 12.5 points for Fischer, 8.5 for Spassky.
Bobby Fischer, the new world chess champion, the first American to hold the undisputed title since Steinitz, effectively.
And the man who broke the 24-year Soviet monopoly. It was a global sensation.
He became instantly famous, right? Beyond just the chess world.
Oh, massively famous. An overnight celebrity worldwide. People called him the Einstein of chess. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated major news magazines.
And he was offered huge endorsement deals.
Millions of dollars worth, apparently. For everything from drinks to cars. And incredibly, true to his character perhaps, he turned almost all of them down.
Just wasn't interested in capitalizing on the fame that way.
Seemingly not. But this incredible high point, winning the title in such dramatic fashion, it paradoxically marked the beginning of the end of his serious chess career.
Because he never defended the title.
Exactly. That 1972 match in Reykjavik ended up being his last official competitive chess for 20 years.
Why? What happened leading up to the 1975 defense?
Fischer had always hated the existing championship format, first to 12.5 points, draws counting as half a point. He felt it encouraged the leader to play cautiously, just aiming for draws to secure the title, which he saw as stifling creative, fighting chess.
So he demanded changes.
Drastic changes. For his scheduled 1975 title defense against the challenger Anatoly Karpov, Fischer laid out a list of non-negotiable demands to FID, the World Chess Federation.
What were the key demands?
The main ones were: the match should be decided by the first player to win 10 games, draws not counting at all. And crucially, if the score reached 9 wins apiece, 9-9, the champion Fischer would retain the title.
That 9-9 clause seems like a big advantage for the champion.
It was the major sticking point. FID actually agreed to the 10 wins format, a huge concession.
Yeah.
But they rejected the 9-9 tie clause. They felt it was unfair, requiring the challenger to win by at least 2 games, 10-8. They offered compromises, like a 6-6 tie retaining the title.
And Fischer wouldn't budge.
Not an inch. He insisted on all his conditions being met exactly. When FID formally refused the 9-9 clause, Fischer refused to play.
So he just forfeited the title?
Yes. In 1975, Anatoly Karpov was declared the new world chess champion by default. Fischer simply walked away from the title he had fought so incredibly hard to win just 3 years earlier.
An astonishing end to his reign. So that match of the century, it really was his peak and, in a way, his finale on the world stage for a long, long time.
It absolutely was. Its legacy is immense, though. It inspired books, films, even the musical chess. It cemented Fischer's legend, for better or worse.
Which leaves us with that final kind of provocative thought, doesn't it? Looking back at everything, the demands, the paranoia, the brinkmanship, the forfeit threat, alongside the undeniable genius on the board.
Yeah, you have to wonder. Was all that extreme behavior, that relentless demand for perfect conditions, somehow necessary for him? Was it part of the psychological armor he needed to take down the Soviet chess empire?
Or was that same uncompromising nature, that same inability to bend, ultimately the very thing that drove him away from the game, the reason he couldn't defend the title and just disappeared?
Was the thing that made him champion also the thing that guaranteed he wouldn't remain champion? It's the enduring puzzle of Bobby Fischer and the match of the century.
A truly fascinating story full of genius and complexity.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
We'll catch you on the next one. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into the icy, complex world of a creature that carries perhaps the greatest identity crisis in the entire animal kingdom.
You must be talking about the orca.
Exactly. The largest member of the oceanic dolphin family, a sleek, black and white torpedo of intelligence, known by two, well, radically different names, the powerful and graceful orca.
And the notorious, almost mythological killer whale.
Yeah. That duality, it really frames the mission of this deep dive for you, our listener, doesn't it?
It really does, because for centuries, this creature was feared. Pliny the Elder famously called it an enormous mass of savage flesh. Not exactly flattering.
No, not at all. But today, we've pulled together a pretty comprehensive stack of sources that, well, they reposition it completely as a beacon of animal culture, astonishing intelligence, and really complex social structure.
Right. Our mission here is to cut through that, historical fear pretty quickly.
We need to understand what elevates this apex predator, which can reach, a formidable 8 meters long and weigh over 6 tons for the males.
Yeah, huge animals.
Huge. What elevates them from just a simple killer to the subject of intense scientific scrutiny, conservation emergency, and, frankly, global public fascination.
Yeah, and we'll be digging into everything. Their complex civilizations, these specialized hunting methods they have.
Their conservation struggles, which are significant, and believe it or not, their increasingly complicated, almost, antagonistic relationship with human sailors these days.
That's a really recent and strange development. But first, we really have to unpack the name game itself. Why this split? Killer whale. It's the traditional kind of Terrifying label, right?
Right, and it tells us more about the observers than the observed, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That name is purely historical. It came from ancient sailors seeing them hunt the really big whales, sperm whales, baleen whales.
So it wasn't whales that killed, but killers of whales. They called them whale killers first, apparently.
Exactly, which then sort of morphed into killer whales. It makes sense when you see it that way.
But the shift toward orca, that feels significant. Where does that come from?
It comes from their Latin genus, Orcinus orca. Orcinus seems to refer to Orcus, the Roman god of the dead, the underworld. So maybe a link to their predatory nature there.
Okay, that still sounds a bit ominous.
It does, yeah. But the root orca itself, well, the sources say it's sometimes traced back to a different Latin word, meaning something like a large-bellied pot.
Slight laugh. Okay, that definitely doesn't fit the image of this streamlined 8-meter predator, a pot.
Not really, no. But since around the 1960s, scientists and the public have increasingly adopted orca. It helps recognize their true taxonomic home.
Beaches.
They're dolphins, the largest member of the oceanic dolphin family, Delphinidae.
Right. Not actually whales in the same way a humpback is a whale.
Correct. And you still hear older terms sometimes, like blackfish or grampus. But grampus is confusing because, well, grampus is also the genus for rhesus dolphin.
Okay, so orca avoids that confusion too.
It does. And fundamentally, that shift to orca reflects a much greater appreciation for the creature's intelligence, its social complexity, rather than just focusing on its, predatory skill.
Speaking of complexity, let's dive into the taxonomy, because this is where that identity crisis gets, well, deeply scientific. We call them Orcinus orca globally, right? Implying one single species.
Yeah. But the sources make it crystal clear that classification is rapidly falling apart under scrutiny.
How so?
Well, it's what you might call the single species paradox. Right now, Orca is the only recognized species in its genus. But the genetic evidence, the ecological evidence, it's overwhelming. This classification just isn't enough.
So what are scientists proposing?
They're proposing dividing the global population into multiple races, subspecies, or maybe even distinct species. Based on their specialized diets, their unique cultures, they're essentially reproductively isolated groups.
Meaning they don't interbreed?
Generally, no, which is a huge signal for speciation, for becoming separate species.
Okay, but if they look, broadly similar, black and white, big fin, why does it matter scientifically if we call them one species or 5? What's the real-world impact?
Oh, it matters hugely for conservation. Massively. That's why the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, lists the orca globally as data deficient.
I always assumed data deficient meant we just didn't know enough about them.
In this case, it's more complicated.
Yeah.
That status exists precisely because these populations are so distinct, genetically and ecologically. If the IUCN were to officially split orca into, say, 5 or 6 different species globally,
then what happens?
then several of those smaller localized populations would immediately qualify as endangered or even critically endangered.
Wow. So the data deficient status isn't really a lack of data. It's more like an administrative paralysis, stemming from this scientific debate over how to classify them.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Recognizing them as separate species triggers specific legal protections, crucial funding under international law. But until that split is formalized globally, some highly threatened groups, like the southern residents off Washington state, don't get the level of international protection they probably need.
Because technically, they're just considered part of a globally abundant species, even though they're clearly struggling.
Exactly. That administrative lag. It's a critical challenge for their conservation.
Okay, let's focus then on the most studied groups, the ones off the west coast of North America, the ecotypes there. There are 3 main types, right? Defined mostly by diet.
Correct. Diet dictates pretty much everything about their lives.
Yeah.
First, you have the residents.
The fish eaters?
Yep, highly social. Their lives revolve around these stable, really complex matrilineal groups. Individuals stay with their mothers for life. It's incredible.
And their strategy involves sound.
Very much so. They're loud, they talk constantly, using echolocation and calls. Because their main prey salmon are relatively deaf to their calls, so they can coordinate hunts acoustically.
Okay, then the counterpoint, the transients, or, as they're often called now, Bigg's orcas.
Right, named after Michael Bigg, the researcher who pioneered photo identification. These are mammal eaters. They hunt seals, sea lions, dolphins, porpoises, even other whales sometimes.
And their strategy is completely different.
Totally different. It's all about stealth. They usually hunt in smaller groups, the bonds aren't quite as rigid as the residents, and critically, they're often silent when hunting.
Because their prey can hear them.
Exactly. Their prey has excellent hearing, so silence is key. The difference in behavior between residents and transients is just, it's so stark. It's hard to believe they're technically the same species right now.
And there's a third group, more mysterious.
The offshores. Yeah, they live further out at sea, as the name suggests. Genetically distinct again. They tend to form really large pods, hundreds sometimes, and their teeth, they're often very worn down.
Disgusting.
Suggesting they might prey heavily on sharks, maybe Greenland sharks or others with rough skin, or perhaps they feed on schooling fish that require some sort of abrasive processing. We're still learning a lot about the offshores.
And this kind of specialization isn't just a North American thing, right? It's global. You mentioned Antarctic types.
Yes, 4 documented types in the Antarctic alone, type A, B, C, and D. They have different colorations, slightly different sizes, and definitely different hunting techniques adapted to that icy environment. Type B, for instance, hunts seals on ice floes. Type C hunts fish under the ice.
It just reinforces that idea of multiple species or subspecies.
Absolutely. And the genetic sequencing data strongly supports this. It's not just theory anymore. The data suggests that Antarctic types B and C, plus the North Pacific transients we just talked about, probably should be formally recognized as distinct species.
And there's been some movement on that front recently, a provisional recognition.
Yes, just this year, 2024. The Society for Marine Mammalogy provisionally recognized 2 subspecies for those eastern North Pacific orcas. It's a big step.
What are the new names?
Orcinus orca reader for the residents, and Orcinus orca rectipinus for the transients.
Auroger meaning black, maybe, and rectipinus.
Yeah, Adruder likely refers to their dark coloring. Rectipinus probably refers to the transients' generally straighter, taller dorsal fin shape compared to the residents. It's a formal acknowledgement that these groups were on separate evolutionary paths. Huge for science and potentially for conservation down the line.
Okay, let's shift from the species debate to the actual animal. The physical architecture that lets them dominate pretty much every ocean, these are just formidable creatures.
They really are. And the sheer scale is the first thing that hits you. Males are the heavyweights, typically, 6 to 8 meters long, that's 20 to 26 feet, and weighing over 6 tons.
6 tons.
Yeah. Females are a bit smaller, usually 5 to 7 meters, maybe 3 to 4 tons. That size difference, the sexual dimorphism, it's quite pronounced.
And nowhere more obvious than that iconic dorsal fin.
Absolutely. The male's dorsal fin is just massive. It can stand up to 1.8 meters high, that's nearly 6 feet, and it's usually shaped like a tall, elongated triangle.
Whereas the females?
Significantly smaller and much more curved, more falcate. You can often spot the adult males in a pod just by that giant fin slicing through the water.
Now, you mentioned photo identification earlier. I found it amazing how scientists use their natural markings, like a biological fingerprinting system, right? Crucial for tracking those family bonds.
It completely revolutionized orca science. Being able to identify individuals without having to capture or tag them invasively, it relies on 2 main things. First, the saddle patch.
That gray or white patch behind the fin.
Exactly. The shape, the color, any markings within it, it's unique to each whale, like a natural name tag.
And the second part?
The dorsal fin itself. Any nicks, scratches, tears, even just the subtle variations in shape over time. These are all cataloged. Researchers use high-resolution photos.
Like a barcode made of scars and shape.
Precisely. And by meticulously tracking these, scientists in the Pacific Northwest, for example, have identified and followed hundreds of individuals over decades, which allows for actual population counts each year, not just estimates.
And that gives incredible insight into their life cycles, who's related to who, how long they live.
It's why we know about matriarchs like Ocean Sun L25, who is estimated to be nearly a century old when she passed. That kind of long-term data comes directly from patiently photographing saddle patches and dorsal fins year after year. A little scratch tells a huge story.
Incredible. And speaking of coloration, it's not always just black and white, is it?
No. Newborn calves, their white areas are actually yellowish or orangey at first. It takes a while to turn bright white. And in the Antarctic, some orcas, especially type B and C, can look distinctly brown or yellow.
Why is that?
It's usually a thick coating of diatoms, microscopic algae, that builds up on their skin in those nutrient-rich but very cold waters. They actually seem to rub against ice sometimes to try and scrape it off.
Huh. Okay, let's talk about their hunting equipment. They're built for speed, obviously, but also for sophisticated detection, right?
Their sensory toolkit is exceptional. They have good eyesight, both above and below water. excellent hearing. But the real game changer is their echolocation. It's incredibly sophisticated.
More than just detecting objects.
Oh, much more. They emit rapid bursts of clicks, and by listening to the returning echoes, they can determine the exact size, shape, location, speed, direction of movement. Even the characteristics of the tissues of their prey, like is it bone or soft tissue. They build a detailed sonic picture of their world.
A 3D sonar map.
Essentially, yes. And then, of course, they need the power to back it up. Those jaws are immensely strong.
And their teeth have that interesting angle, slightly forward.
Yes, the front teeth especially are inclined slightly forward and outward. It's thought to help protect them when prey thrashes violently. It helps brace against those powerful, jerking movements, letting the middle and back teeth maintain the grip without breaking the front ones.
Smart design. And all this is wrapped in a thick layer of blubber. How thick?
It can be 7.6 to 10 centimeters thick, so 3 to 4 inches. Vital insulation for surviving in cold waters, but also energy storage.
And it helps with speed, too, presumably. Streamlining?
Definitely contributes to their hydrodynamics. They're incredibly efficient swimmers. They can reach speeds up to 56 kilometers per hour. That's about 35 miles per hour in short bursts when chasing fast prey or maybe avoiding disturbance. All these physical traits just perfectly equip them as the ocean's apex predator.
Which brings us neatly to their diet and hunting strategies. They get called the wolves of the sea, don't they, because of that cooperative group hunting?
Yeah, that analogy comes up a lot, and it fits in many ways. They need to be effective hunters, too. The average orca needs to eat something like 227 kilograms or 500 pounds of food every single day.
500 pounds. That takes serious teamwork.
It really does. But again, we have to remember the specialization. Different populations, different ecotypes focus on different things. Think about those Northeast Pacific residents again.
The salmon specialists.
Exactly. They've essentially made an existential bet on salmon. Chinook salmon, specifically, make up about 65% of the salmon they eat, and salmon overall is something like 96% of their entire diet.
Which makes them incredibly vulnerable if those salmon stocks decline, right?
Absolutely. It's a direct link. If the Chinook salmon populations crash, which they have, largely due to human factors like habitat loss and overfishing, the southern resident orca population suffers immediately and dramatically. We're seeing that play out right now. Their fate is tied to the salmon's fate.
Such a precarious situation. But other fish-eating populations have developed some amazing techniques, haven't they? Like that carousel feeding off Norway?
Oh, it's incredible to watch. It's used primarily on herring, which form huge schools.
Walk us through it. How does it work?
It's all about coordination. A group of orcas works together to herd a massive school of herring into a tight, dense ball near the surface. They use loud calls, they flash their white undersides, maybe even use bubble nets like humpbacks do, to panic the fish and force them together.
Creating a concentrated bait ball.
Exactly. Once the ball is tightly packed, the orcas don't just charge through it randomly, they take turns. An orca will swim up to the edge of the ball and deliver a powerful slap with its tail flukes.
Just smack the ball.
Smack the ball of fish. It creates a shockwave that stuns or kills maybe 10 to 15 herring instantly. Then the orca, and maybe others nearby, just calmly swim through and pick up the stunned, easy-to-eat fish.
Wow. Highly efficient, low-energy way to feed on a huge school. Requires incredible cooperation.
It really does. It's a learned cooperative strategy passed down culturally.
Okay, now let's switch gears to the transients, the mammal eaters. Their prey is a whole different challenge, right? Seals, sea lions, dolphins.
Yeah.
Much smarter, more agile, potentially dangerous.
Absolutely. They hunt a huge variety of marine mammals. And taking down larger prey, like, say, a gray whale calf or even an adult minke whale, requires immense coordination, endurance, and strategy.
How do they manage that?
They often work in groups to isolate a target, frequently a calf, from its mother or the pod. They'll chase it for hours, wearing it down, taking turns to bite at the fins and flukes to slow it down and cause blood loss. It's a relentless, coordinated effort.
And we know some prey species have developed counter-strategies, like sperm whales.
Yes. Female sperm whales, when threatened by orcas, will often form a protective circle around their calves, facing outwards with their powerful tails. It's called a rosette or marguerite formation. A wall of flukes is a serious deterrent.
And humpbacks sometimes intervene, even if it's not their own calf being attacked.
That's been observed, yeah. Humpback whales have been seen actively mobbing orcas that are attacking other species, like gray whale calves or even seals. It suggests a level of, well, perhaps empathy or at least a complex understanding of the threat orcas pose across species lines. It's fascinating behavior.
But orcas can even take down the biggest animal on Earth, right? There were those recent records of them killing blue whales.
That was a game changer in understanding their capabilities. Until recently, it was thought adult blue whales were likely immune to orca predation just due to sheer size. But these observations off Western Australia in 2019 and documented fully in 2022.
What do they show?
They documented groups of orcas successfully hunting and killing blue whales, including adults estimated between 18 and 22 meters long. It likely takes dozens of orcas working together for many hours, using coordinated attacks, often targeting the tongue and blubber, causing massive trauma and exhaustion.
It just confirms their status as the ultimate apex predator. Nothing in the ocean is truly safe.
Pretty much. And their interactions with sharks are also really interesting. Great white sharks, for example.
The top predator shark. How do they fare against orcas?
They don't. When orcas show up in an area known for great whites, like the Faroe Islands or South Africa, the sharks typically vanish. They clear out immediately.
So the sharks recognize the orcas as a bigger threat.
Absolutely. Orcas are known to prey on great whites and other sharks like basking sharks, seven gills, rays, and they often show incredible precision, targeting the liver.
Wait, the liver?
It's extremely rich in lipids, very energy dense. They've even developed techniques to sometimes induce tonic immobility in sharks, flipping them upside down to paralyze them to access the liver more easily. It shows this competitive dominance and specialized knowledge.
Okay, now for the really culturally specific, learned techniques,
Sure.
intentional beaching has to be one of the most dramatic.
It is astonishing and incredibly high risk. It's mainly observed in two places, Peninsula Valdez in Argentina and the Crozet Islands in the southern Indian Ocean.
What exactly do they do?
They literally surf a wave onto specific steep, gravelly beaches to grab seals or sea lions resting near the water's edge. Then they have to wriggle back into the water immediately.
Wow. The timing has to be perfect, right? Get stranded and you're done.
Exactly. It's not instinctive. It's a learned skill that takes years to master. And this is where we see clear evidence of teaching.
How so?
In the Crozet Islands, researchers have observed mother orcas deliberately pushing their calves partway onto the beach, sort of nudging them through the motions. They wait nearby, ready to pull the calf back if it gets stuck. Sometimes they'll even bring a stunned or weakened seal for the calf to practice on.
That's incredible, deliberate, risky teaching of a complex skill. Passing down culture.
It's one of the clearest examples of animal teaching outside of primates. Truly remarkable.
And the wave washing in Antarctica is just as clever, using physics.
Right. This is primarily Antarctic type B orcas hunting seals, like Weddell seals, resting on ice floes.
So how does the wave thing work?
First, they often spy hop, lifting their heads vertically out of the water to locate a seal on a floe, maybe quite far away. Then a group of them, maybe 4 or 5, will line up side by side.
Okay.
And they swim together in perfect synchrony, building speed directly towards the ice floe. They create a coordinated underwater surge, a bow wave.
A targeted mini tsunami.
Exactly. The wave washes over the floe, washing the seal off the ice and into the water.
Where other members of the pod are waiting.
Precisely. Other orcas are often positioned strategically to intercept the seal as soon as it hits the water. It's an incredibly calculated, cooperative maneuver using hydrodynamics, pure genius and learned culture combined.
Amazing. Before we move off hunting, we should touch on a couple of stranger behaviors mentioned in the sources. Surplus killing.
Yeah, there are observations, like off British Columbia with stellar sea lions, where orcas seem to, well, play with their prey until it's exhausted and dies, but then they don't actually eat it.
Why would they do that? Practice. Play.
We don't fully know the motivation. Maybe hunting practice for younger animals, maybe a form of social bonding or play, maybe just an expression of their high intelligence and capability when food isn't scarce. It's puzzling.
And the salmon hats.
Slight chuckle.
Yeah, that's another odd one, primarily seen in the southern residents. Orcas, especially females, have been seen carrying dead salmon balanced on their heads for extended periods. Looks like they're wearing a hat.
Any idea why? Honestly, no clear explanation. It seems to be a behavioral fad that pops up, spreads through the group for a while, and then fades away. It might be play. It might have some social significance we don't grasp. It's definitely learned and passed around, another little piece of their culture.
Okay, so the complexity of their hunting is clearly immense, and it seems matched only by the complexity of their minds and, crucially, their societies. Let's get into that social architecture.
This really is the cornerstone of understanding the orca. Their societies are incredibly complex, incredibly stable. The only real comparisons in the mammal world are elephants and maybe some higher primates.
And understanding this complexity is vital for debates like the one around captivity, right?
Absolutely. Because when you capture an orca, you're not just taking an individual animal, you're potentially removing a key member from a highly integrated, long-lasting social unit, a civilization in a sense. The impacts ripple through the whole group.
And the absolute core of that resident society is the matriline. Tell us about the stability there. It's extraordinary.
It really is unmatched by most mammals. In resident populations particularly, individuals of both sexes live with their mothers for their entire lives,
Whole lives, never leaving.
never permanently leaving the core matrilineal group. A female, a matriarch, can live up to 90 years, so you can have pods traveling together that span 4 generations. The old matriarch, her sons and daughters, her daughter's offspring, maybe even their offspring.
Wow. And they only separate briefly.
Yeah, maybe for a few hours at a time for foraging in smaller groups, or for mating, which happens outside the pod. But they always return to that core family unit.
That lifelong bond must make the older females incredibly important, especially given that orcas are one of the few species, besides humans and pilot whales, known to go through menopause.
Exactly. The post-reproductive matriarch isn't just retired. She becomes this vital reservoir of ecological knowledge and social leadership.
Like knowing where to find food during lean years.
Precisely. She knows the migration routes, the best hunting spots learned over decades, which other pods are related or friendly. This supports the grandmother hypothesis, the idea that older, non-reproductive females significantly boost the survival chances of their younger kin by sharing crucial knowledge and experience.
That's fascinating. And the mating system reinforces this. They mate outside their own group.
Yes, they practice exogamy mating outside the immediate pod or clan, which is crucial for maintaining genetic diversity and preventing inbreeding. But the offspring always belong to the mother's matriline. They come home.
So it maintains the family unit's integrity while ensuring genetic health. Smart system. But this structure isn't just one layer, is it? Matrilines grouped together.
Right. There's a clear hierarchy, especially among residents. You have the core matriline. Then several related matrilines that frequently travel and socialize together form a pod. Pods are often the units we study most closely.
And beyond pods.
You have clans. Clans are groups of pods that share similar acoustic dialects and likely descend from a common older maternal ancestor, even if the direct link is generations back.
So the way they talk reflects their shared history.
Exactly. Similarity in dialect indicates closeness and relatedness, culturally and genetically. And then the broadest level is the community. This is a collection of pods that regularly associate, maybe in specific seasons or areas, but they don't necessarily share dialects or recent maternal ancestors. It's the larger social network where mating between different clans likely occurs.
Okay, so these layers are reflected in their communication. Let's talk about their vocalizations. Clicks, whistles, pulsed calls.
Right. Clicks are primarily for echolocation, for navigating and finding prey. Whistles and the complex pulsed calls are more for social communication.
And the dialects are key cultural markers.
Absolutely. Each resident pod has its own unique, stable dialect, a specific repertoire of discrete, repetitive pulsed calls. These are learned, passed down through generations, primarily from mother to calf.
So a calf learns its family accent.
Pretty much, yeah. And the degree of similarity between the dialects of different pods reflects how closely related those pods are. It's a badge of identity and relatedness.
And this links back to that difference between residents and transients, right? The acoustic strategy.
Crucial difference. It's adaptive communication. Residents, hunting fish that don't hear their calls well, can afford to be incredibly vocal. They're constantly chatting, coordinating hunts, socializing.
Whereas transients hunting mammals
Have to be silent assassins. Their prey seals, dolphins have excellent hearing, often in the same frequencies orcas use. So transients are typically very quiet when hunting, relying on stealth and maybe passive listening more than active echolocation. This silence is a vital, learned cultural strategy for survival. Newborns learn their calls from their mothers, reinforcing that this is culturally transmitted from the start.
Okay, let's shift to intelligence itself. We know they have big brains, but what's the evidence beyond just size?
Well, size isn't everything, but
Right.
they do have the second heaviest brain among all marine mammals. Only sperm whales have bigger ones. But more importantly, studies show a very large and complex cerebrum. They have possibly more gray matter and a higher density of cortical neurons in certain areas than almost any other mammal, potentially including humans.
So the hardware for complex thought is definitely there.
It certainly seems so. And this neurological capacity translates directly into the complex problem-solving, learning, and cognitive flexibility we see in their behavior.
Like that famous story about the Alaskan orcas and the long-line fishing boats. That really shows adaptation, doesn't it?
It's a classic example of their cognitive flexibility. Fishermen started using long lines, and the orcas quickly figured out, hey, free meal. They learned to patrol the lines and steal the fish, often just stripping the valuable parts.
So the fishermen tried to trick them.
Yeah, they tried using decoy lines with no bait, hoping the orcas would waste time checking them. But the orcas quickly learned to distinguish the real lines from the fakes, probably by acoustics or subtle visual cues.
Then the fishermen tried spacing their boats far apart, pulling up only small amounts of fish at a time, trying to overwhelm the orcas.
Right, thinking one pod couldn't be everywhere at once. But the orcas adapted again. They learned to split their pods into coordinated groups. One group would shadow one boat, another group would shadow the second boat miles away, defeating the fishermen's strategy.
They were essentially coordinating a counter-strategy across multiple locations.
Exactly. It shows sophisticated problem-solving, communication, and learning being passed between individuals and groups in response to a human challenge. Remarkable stuff.
But perhaps the biggest news, something that really challenges definitions, came just this year, 2025. The tool use observation.
Ah, yes, the allokelping. That was extraordinary. Observed in the Salish Sea, near where the southern residents live.
What exactly was seen?
An orca, and maybe others later, was filmed deliberately tearing off long strands of bull kelp, and then, well, rolling them around its body, draping them over itself, sometimes in groups.
Okay, why is that considered tool use? It sounds a bit like play, or maybe decoration.
And that's the fascinating part. Even if the purpose is play, or maybe sensory exploration or social display, we don't know the purpose, for sure. It represents the deliberate modification and manipulation of an external object for a specific interaction.
Using something from the environment as an extension of oneself.
Exactly. It's the first properly documented case of tool use, however you define the edges of that term, in wild killer whales. It demonstrates that the cognitive capacity to interact with objects in this complex, non-essential way exists in their world.
It forces us to broaden our definition of what constitutes tools or technology in the non-human world, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It opens up a whole new avenue for research and understanding their cognitive world.
And beyond problem-solving and tools, there are anecdotes suggesting, well, almost a sense of humor. Or playful teasing.
Researchers have certainly described behaviors that are hard to interpret otherwise. Things like wild orcas repeatedly moving equipment, like hydrophones, just out of reach when divers try to retrieve them, or initiating interactions that seem like games.
Like the snowball story.
Yeah, there's an account from Antarctica where a researcher threw a snowball into the water near an orca, and the orca dove down, came back up with a chunk of ice, and tossed it back towards the boat. It's hard not to see that as playful interaction, a sign of curiosity and high social intelligence.
Okay, let's look at their life cycle and the big conservation issues threatening these incredibly intelligent cultural beings. We mentioned the long lives of females, the matriarchs being critical, especially with menopause. Females can live 50 to 80 years, typically, some close to 100.
That's right. Ocean sun, L25, was estimated to be around 97. That long post-reproductive life is key for passing down knowledge. Males, though, have a significantly shorter average lifespan.
How much shorter?
Average is around 29 years, maybe a maximum of 60 in the wild. And studies suggest they remain quite dependent on their mothers or other females in the pod for successful foraging and survival throughout their lives. Losing a matriarch can be devastating for her sons especially.
Now, despite being found globally, they face serious threats. And maybe the biggest, most insidious one is pollution. Especially toxins like PCBs.
Yes, this is where that data-deficient IUCN status becomes problematic again, because it masks severe localized threats. The most critical global threat is likely the bioaccumulation of legacy industrial chemicals, particularly polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and also some persistent pesticides like DDT.
Why are orcas so vulnerable to these? How does it work up the food chain?
It's a process called biomagnification. PCBs are fat-soluble, meaning they accumulate in fatty tissues. Tiny organisms absorb a little bit. Small fish eat lots of those organisms, concentrating the PCBs. Bigger fish, like salmon, eat lots of smaller fish, concentrating it further.
And the orca's at the very top.
Exactly, eating hundreds of pounds of contaminated fish every single day. So the orca accumulates the toxic load from everything below it in the food web, concentrating these chemicals to incredibly high levels in its own blubber.
And what do these high PCB levels do to the orcas?
They're devastating. They severely disrupt reproductive function, leading to miscarriages, stillbirths, and very high calf mortality in the first year. They also fundamentally compromise the immune system, making the orcas much more vulnerable to diseases.
So it hits them on multiple fronts.
Yes, a major study in 2018 projected a dramatic decline, even collapse, of many orca populations around the world in the coming decades, purely due to the existing levels of PCB pollution. It's a toxic time bomb they carry in their bodies.
That's incredibly grim. And on top of chemical pollution, there's noise pollution. Shipping, drilling, sonar.
Yeah, underwater noise is a huge problem. Chronic noise from shipping traffic masks their communication calls and interferes with their echolocation, making it harder to hunt and socialize. This is especially true in critical habitats like Haro Strait for the southern residents.
And acute high intensity sounds like Navy sonar. That can cause physical harm, right? Not just stress.
There's strong evidence for that. High-intensity, mid-frequency active sonar, used by navies for submarine detection, overlaps with frequencies orcas use and hear well. Research on other cetaceans, like beaked whales, has linked sonar exposure to strandings and tissues damage consistent with decompression sickness, the bends.
The idea being the sonar panics them, causing them to surface too rapidly.
That's a leading hypothesis. Researcher Ken Balcom documented unusual agitation, grouping, and movement away from sonar activity in orcas in Puget Sound back in 2003. It strongly suggests sonar can cause significant disturbance, potentially leading to injury or even death. It shows how our acoustic footprint is making their world dangerous.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to how our perception of them has changed. It really flipped from fear to fascination, didn't it? And Moby Doll in 1964 seems to be the catalyst.
Moby Doll was huge. Captured off British Columbia, initially intended to be killed and used as a model for a sculpture. But the aquarium director decided to try and keep him alive. He became the first orca ever studied closely in captivity.
And what did they find? The savage flesh.
The complete opposite. To everyone's surprise, Moby Doll was remarkably docile, intelligent, and showed no aggression towards his human keepers. It completely shattered the killer myth for the public and scientists alike. It sparked this huge wave of interest and research in live orcas that really took off through the 1970s.
But that shift also led directly to the rise of orcas in marine parks and the whole controversy around captivity.
Exactly. It's a complex legacy. Public fascination fueled the demand for seeing them up close. But ethically, it's deeply problematic. We know wild lifespans are much longer. Females averaging maybe 46 years, living up to 80. Males averaging 31, maxing out around 60.
Compared to captive lifespans.
Much shorter on average, often only in their 20s historically.
Yeah.
Plus, you see health issues rarely seen in the wild, like the dorsal fin collapse in 60 to 90% of captive males, likely due to gravity, swimming in circles in shallow tanks, maybe diet and stress too.
And critically, the history of attacks on trainers in captivity, like Tilikum, involved in multiple deaths.
Right. Which stands in stark contrast to the fact that there has never been a single, reliably documented case of a wild orca killing a human. Never.
That difference really highlights the argument that their intelligence, their social needs, their sheer size and power make them fundamentally unsuited to life in a concrete tank.
That's the core ethical argument. The film, Blackfish, brought this to a massive audience, and certainly pressured places like SeaWorld to end their orca breeding programs in 2016. Those shows continue. The debate is far from over.
And finally, the most recent and perhaps strangest human-orca interaction, the Iberian situation. Since 2020, these coordinated attacks on sailboats.
It's unprecedented and bizarre. We're talking over 500 incidents reported between 2020 and 2023 off the coasts of Spain and Portugal, primarily sailboats.
And they're specifically targeting
the rudders. Videos and accounts show groups of orcas, often younger ones but sometimes adults too, deliberately ramming, biting, and pushing on the rudders, sometimes snapping them clean off. They seem focused entirely on disabling the steering mechanism.
Why? What are the theories? Experts seem completely divided.
They really are. Theories range wildly. Could it be some kind of revenge for a past negative interaction, maybe involving entanglement or a boat strike, initiated by one individual nicknamed White Gladys, and spreading culturally?
Or something less intentional?
Maybe. Some suggest it could be related to interacting with the propeller wash or the boat's wake, maybe a behavior that started as play or curiosity and escalated. Or perhaps it's truly just play. A behavioral fad, like the salmon hats, that got rougher and is spreading through this specific subpopulation. Right now, the play or cultural fad theory seems to be gaining traction, given it's mostly non-aggressive towards humans themselves and localized.
And the recommended defense is almost as strange as the attacks themselves. dropping sandbags.
Yeah, the advice from some authorities is to try and disrupt their focus or potentially confuse their sonar by dropping bags of sand or make noise underwater near the rudder area. It shows how much we're still scrambling to understand and respond to this completely novel learned behavior in an intelligent, adaptive predator.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has shown, I think, beyond any doubt, that the orca isn't just one thing. It's not monolithic. It's this collection of distinct, culturally rich populations, specialized hunters, complex social bonds, rivaling our own in some ways.
Absolutely. We've unpacked the species problem, how that data-deficient label hides real conservation crises. We looked at the incredible adaptations for hunting, the sheer variety from carousel feeding on herring to wave-washing seals off ice.
And the foundation of it all, those incredibly stable matrilineal societies where knowledge held by post-reproductive grandmothers is absolutely key. The capacity for teaching high-risk behaviors like intentional beaching. It's just mind-blowing.
And then, just this year, documented tool use with the kelping. It just keeps pushing our understanding of their cognitive ability.
But layered on top of all that wonder are these immense challenges they face. The PCBs ticking away in their blubber, threatening their ability to even reproduce successfully. The constant barrage of underwater noise. These strange new conflicts with boats.
And these are almost entirely human-caused pressures, impacting these incredibly specialized ocean-spanning civilizations that we're only just beginning to truly appreciate.
So, wrapping this up for you, our listener, what does it all mean? The sources show orcas passing down hunting skills generationally, maintaining these rigid social structures, maybe even using tools now. What responsibility does that place on us? Especially when we once just saw them as savage flesh.
Yeah. How do we grapple with a non-human species that clearly possesses culture, actively teaches it, and forces us to rethink intelligence itself? What other complex cultural practices, these unique oceanic ways of life, are out there, maybe disappearing before we even get a chance to understand them?
That really is the crucial question, isn't it?
It is. We've barely scratched the surface of understanding how these diverse orca societies function, how they communicate, how they see the world. We need to move fast, scientifically to understand and politically to protect their distinct identities and cultures before the very complexity we're learning to admire is lost forever under the weight of human impact.
A powerful and challenging thought to end on. Thank you for diving deep with us today into the world of the orca. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.